mixed reviews about the national minimum wage. Labour Federation COSATU has proposed that the national minimum wage be increased in 2025 by the average inflation rate plus 3%. But the DA says a national minimum wage hike will deepen South Africa's unemployment crisis. The 30th of September marked the closing date for the submission of written comments concerning possible adjustments to the national minimum wage for next year. The National Minimum Wage Act has existed since 2019 and it aims to enhance economic development and social justice by increasing wages and improving the lives of the lowest paid. To talk more on this, we are joined by the DA spokesperson on employment and labour, Michael Bagraim, and the General Secretary of COSATU, Phetoe, will be joining us shortly, and they'll be having a discussion about this with us. Michael, great to have you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me the honor of joining. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Now, the DA has submitted comments to the National Minimum Wage Committee opposing any proposed increases to South Africa's national minimum wage. Why is the DA against the idea of a national minimum wage?
Well, quite simply this. We have 41% unemployment in South Africa. We have over 11 million people who are in the job queues, people who want to work, who can't find work. Every single family in South Africa is suffering. We're probably the worst in the world with regard to that. Over and above that, we have issues with all sorts of other issues in the labour market. What the minimum wage has done since it's been introduced has not actually trickled down to the lowest people in the country, lowest earners in the country. What it has done is it kept more and more people out of the workplace. Now, I understand where the unions are coming from because they're saying that their workers are at the workplace, they're working, they want more money. I understand that and I respect that. I don't have a problem. I wish everyone could get 100,000 Rand a month. That's not the issue over here. We have a country that is on its hands and knees. The country itself is reeling from unemployment. It's an unbelievable situation. How the unions have sustained this is impossible. So we in the Democratic Alliance have suggested many other issues, such as a work seekers alliance. We want the work seekers to get some sort of allowance to come, be able to get CVs put together, to get decent clothing, to go to interviews, and to get the education to go into the workplace. Workers themselves are obviously wanting more and more money. That's natural. I would be in exactly the same situation. And we don't in any way begrudge someone from earning more. But what we do begrudge the country from doing is actually locking people out of the workplace. Because as the wages go up, we have more and more small businesses in particular, because that's the engine room of job creation, are saying we can't afford it. So we'll either do one of two things. Either we'll ignore the minimum wage and just take people in below the minimum wage. We only have 2,000 inspectors in South Africa, so the chances of being inspected are nil. So that's the first thing. The second thing they'll do is, no, well, we'll outsource the work to people who aren't paying wages at all. We'll mechanize, we'll computerize, we'll import goods. So what's happened, many industries in South Africa that were the backbone of our job creation are shrinking. And we've seen that with the clothing industry, for instance, in the Western Cape. They said, well, we can't afford the minimum wages, so we'll just import our clothing from China and wherever they get it. So the reality is the Democratic Alliance is now speaking up on behalf of those South Africans that can't find a job, that won't find a job. And no matter what you do, if you make it too difficult with them, they're just never going to find a job, and they'll be in endless queues looking for that job. There are thousands of people who are willing to work for less than the minimum wage, but you can't take them in. Yeah. But government itself is saying, we can't afford the minimum wage. We are going to pay half the minimum wage for people in government, you know, the street jobs that we give people on the streets, the extended public works program. They're saying they can't afford it, so they'd rather have people actually at work, which is understandable, and I respect that as well.
Okay.
And they're saying, well, we can afford it, we'll pay half.
All right, Michael, let's bring Solly into the conversation now. I believe he has joined us. Solly Phetoe, it's great to have you. Thank you very, very much. I'm not sure how much you heard from Michael, but I think you do know the stance of the DA on this national minimum wage and going ahead with comments now closed. And of course, we're going to see what happens from here on. Let's get your views on this and perhaps a response to some of the issues that Michael's raised.
Well, good morning. I'm not sure whether am I audible because I'm joining. I'm on the street.
We can hear you perfectly.
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning and thank you very much and good morning to Michael. You know, my question that I'm going to raise before I can respond to what Michael is saying. Who is DA? DA represent who? Because DA is a political party. It's not an employee association or an organized organization that can represent the interests of the working class and the workers in South Africa. It's a political party. And we're not surprised that DA says this is against the national minimum wage. Even before 1994, DA has never represented the interests of the workers in South Africa and the working class. They have continued to represent the interests of the capitalists. You will recall and remember that before the election on the 2nd of May, DA went publicly and marched to COSATU House and demanded that the national minimum wage, the NHI, and many other policies that are affecting the workers must be scrapped. So we're not surprised, and we're not going to change our approach and our position. The reason why we would want the national minimum wage to be increased with the CPI plus 3% is in relation to the challenges, the economic crisis that we're facing, the poverty, the inequalities, the cost of the cost of high living in South Africa is very high, and it can't be correct that DA come to this platform and say that there's after the national minimum wage that was put in place in 2019, the number of jobs that were cut. Those jobs that were cut because they wanted to show people that they cannot afford the national minimum wage. Since 2019, we've been continuing to see, in particular, the vulnerable workers in the security sector, in the farming sector. We've never seen a retrenchment or dismissal unless it's done, except those that are done deliberately by those who belong to DA. So we think that the national minimum wage is the way to go, and you can compare with number of the countries that were those that have got national minimum wage. They continue to have that minimum to support the almost over 600 million workers who benefited from this issue of national minimum wage. And as we said, as COSATU, national minimum wage is not a living wage. It's nothing. And that's why we are saying we are now entering, as COSATU, in few months we'll be entering a campaign on the living wage. I'm really disappointed about what DA is saying about representing the workers or represent the employers, because they are not employers association. At the National Minimum Wage Commission, we are not meeting with DA, we are meeting with business and business employers, those who are representing their client or the interests of the employers.
So, sorry, let's perhaps get
so
an
understanding.
Sorry, let me just ask you a quick question. In terms of the national minimum wage, how has it improved the lives so far of the lowest paid workers since it was introduced in 2019? Has it had a meaningful effect for them?
It has a meaningful impact to the workers, because at that time when we were starting the minimum wage, domestic workers were earning less than 1,000 rand. Farm workers were earning less than 1,000 rand. At least now, since the national minimum, they are able to pay school fees, they are able to buy food, they are able to travel to work. Let me just give one example. There's one big farm in Limpopo called ZZ2. You know, they're still deducting, they're still making workers to pay for accommodation, they're still making workers to pay for transport, they're still making workers to pay for food. So if you were saying the national minimum wage has not done an impact and you've got employers such as ZZ2, how do you think the workers, the poor working class or the vulnerable workers are going to live?
Michael, let's get a response.
The national minimum wage has made has made a big improvement to the workers.
Let's bring Michael into the conversation now, because I think a lot's been said. Firstly, asking what the DA's interest is, because you certainly don't represent workers, and why are you here? Because there is a sentiment that your voice is more towards the business owners, obviously, that have to pay more, but the workers are the ones that suffer. So perhaps maybe respond to that, and then also to the fact that, you know, since it was introduced, it certainly has changed lives and help those workers that have previously been abused in terms of how much they're being paid.
Well, certainly we represent South Africans. We have the interest of South Africa and our economy at heart. We don't represent any particular individual, and that's the point. Solly represents those that are already in jobs. But even doing that, he knows that there's been retrenchments. He knows that the workforce is shrinking. He understands that, but he's trying to protect those that are his members. But it's disingenuous to say that people are in particular industries are suffering. They belong to bargaining councils. Those bargaining councils have nothing to do with the minimum wage. Those bargaining councils negotiate those wages themselves. And to pick on a particular farm, ZZ2, which I know a lot about, they actually pay far in excess of the minimum wage anyway. That doesn't affect them at all. So, I mean, that's a bad example. The reality is the Democratic Alliance is here for South Africa. We are worried about our future. We are worried about people who are standing in unemployment queues, who are living off the government on a pitiful 300 Rand a month. That's what Solly's doing. He's forcing people to join that 300 Rand a month queues. It's impossible to continue like this. And to say since 2019, it's been improved a lot of the lives of the people, of course it hasn't. It's got worse. It's got far worse. And the reality we are facing now in South Africa is the possibility of this getting worse and worse. If Solly wants to keep it business as usual, well, you can't do that. We're sliding downhill. You've seen the latest figures, the quarterly review that comes out of unemployment in South Africa, and it gets worse every time. The only province that's shown any sort of growth is the Western province, and that happens to be under the Democratic Alliance, under the control of the Democratic Alliance, because we're doing whatever we can to try and create jobs, in particular with the small business sector.
How do you protect, Michael, how do you protect the rights of workers, though, if there is no minimum wage, that I could just hire somebody and pay them whatever and treat them however, without actually having some kind of policy in place to say, this is the minimum that you need to pay me. And this creates dignity amongst workers. You can't just pay them nothing to come in and work.
No, absolutely. And of course, it's a two-way street. If someone wants to come in and work, then you would then offer them an amount. Now, we have the Labour Relations Act, which is very comprehensive. It could protect anyone if you feel there's some sort of discrimination or discriminatory practice. We have the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. We have bargaining councils that actually negotiate wages on behalf of almost 60% of our workforce anyway. So to say that they're not protected, we have some of the most advanced labor laws in the world. Our neighbors don't have minimum wages, and yet their workers are protected. I'll give you an example with me. As an example, when I was a student at school, I wanted to try and get a job to earn some money, to get my pocket money, to be able to entertain myself and do all sorts of things. I went to a restaurant, a chain store, and I said, please, can I get a job as a waiter? And they said, look, we don't have jobs for any waiters. I said, I'll take food off the table. Don't have to pay me. I'll get tips. Well, within a month, I showed my worth, and I was able to then get the wage that I wanted. So you want people to get a foot into the door. You don't want people to stand outside and the employer saying, well, we can't afford it. We'll either ignore all the laws, and that's what the minimum wage is doing. Ignoring all the laws. You have the whole clothing industry up in the northern Natal saying, well, we can't afford that. We'll either close down or we'll break the law. And a lot of them are breaking the law, and the unions are keeping quiet because they know They want people in the workforce.
All right, so Solly, let's come to you now, because there's a lot. There's a lot that's been said there. And perhaps when you respond to what Michael has been saying, perhaps you want to weigh in on the fact as well that there are claims that this national minimum wage would lead to retrenchments and perhaps even a collapse of the economy. And this is something that we cannot afford to see. We've already got a massively high unemployment rate. Let me leave the final say with you on this.
But if you don't want workers to get an increase, are you saying workers must continue to suffer? Workers must continue to starve. The children must not be able to go to school. Workers must not be able to be given to get food on their table. But what Michael is saying is not true. I was in Limpopo last week. Even yesterday, I came from Limpopo. The company that I've mentioned, he must just get the pay slip of those workers and see what I'm saying. I'm not sucking. And he says that company is paying more than the national minimum wage. It's not true. It's not true. I'm interacting with those workers almost every day. Let's leave that one. Since 2019, when the national minimum wage was implemented, Michael must then give us one company that have retrenched workers. And I've said it, and I'm going to repeat it. Where they retrenched, they wanted to show where they retrench workers. They wanted to show the public that they are not going to implement the national minimum wage. Yes, we still have employers who are not complying, and that's why we are forcing that they must be taken to labor court, to CCMA labor court, for them to implement the national minimum wage. And some of the companies, they've done it. They've lost the case in court. They've done it. And in terms of the National Minimum Wage Act, Michael, if you are not able to afford, you apply for what is called exemption. You are given exemption based on the improving your financial statement, consulting the workers or consulting the union and say, here's my financial statement, I'm not able to make profit, I therefore request for an exemption for a certain period. Then the Department of Employment of Labor will then be able to talk to you and talk to the workers. That should be the procedure. But to come to the public engagement, they say it's creating unemployment, is going to do whatever what we have said, is not true. You are representing the interests of capitalists. You are not representing the South Africans. And yes, those workers who belong to the collective, to a bargaining council, we are not talking for them, because those who are at the bargaining council, they've got unions. You've got workers who are not part of the bargaining council. For example, some of the securities are not part of the collective bargaining. Some of the farm workers are not part of the collective bargaining. Some of the majority of domestic workers are not part of the collective bargaining. So those are the workers that were speaking for them. And therefore, what you are saying, what Michael is saying about the issue of the retrenchment is deliberately. It's deliberately. Yes, the economy is in crisis, but the workers are also in crisis. When the economy is in crisis, that's why we're calling for a national shutdown on the 7th of October for a decent work. The worst is that the farmers, in particular, they are not implementing or respecting the laws of this country in terms of those work. I'm sure last week you have seen what has happened. Some of this hospitality, where they were employing foreigners and pay them 600 rand per month. That's what DA wants, and it can't happen. It can't happen in this country. As long as COSATU are here, it will not happen. And we are representing the interests. Yes, you are right. We are representing the interests of organized and unorganized workers.
Solly, we have to leave it there. But I think giving a strong argument there in favor of the workers and in favor of the national minimum wage. Michael as well, thank you for joining us, giving us two sides and some thoughts that we can go away with after that. Solly Phetoe, General Secretary of COSATU, and Michael Bagraim, DA spokesperson on employment and labour, speaking about the pros and the cons of the 2025 national minimum wage determination. You decide.